right, we are going to get started here. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us as we celebrate a truly remarkable milestone, the 100th anniversary of Centerville-Osterville-Marstons Mills Fire Department, proudly known to all of us as COMM. For a century, COMM has stood as a symbol of service, courage, professionalism, and community spirit. Through hurricanes and house fires, emergencies large and small, generations of firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, and volunteers have answered the call day and night with dedication and compassion. Today is not only a celebration of history, but also a tribute to the men and women who built this department, strengthened it, and carried its mission forward across 100 years of service to our villages and neighbors. We are especially fortunate this afternoon to hear from someone who knows COMM from the inside, someone who dedicated years of his life to protecting this community. Our presenter, Britton Crosby, served as a lieutenant and paramedic with COMM and brings both personal experience and deep knowledge of the department's proud history. Please join me in welcoming Britton Crosby as he presents A History of COMM, 100 Years of Service.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. One thing that I know about this presentation is it's being recorded so that people can watch it over time that didn't get to come today. So I may be talking to them some of the time and to you guys some of the time, and we'll go from there. So welcome to the Osterville Library. I want to thank Cindy and Amy and the Osterville Library itself for all the programs that they do. It's amazing what they're able to accomplish in this little village. Pretty cool. So those of you who are staying for the entire weekend, we have a lot of stuff to show you. If you want to go home after we're done with this program, you can laugh. I took a lot of pictures. A lot of the pictures that are in this program came from other people that took some of the pictures. We are always looking for anybody that has old pictures that add to the collection and kind of help to shape up our history. It's our 100-year anniversary on July 11th is the official ceremony that will be held outside here at the library. Bunch of things going on that day, and then the following week is Village Day, where we hope to have the Model A that's out front and a whole bunch of other fire engines in the parade. So I have to attribute my start in the fire department to my Uncle Gus, who lived across the street from me. Started as a call fireman in 1963 and was the first full-time firefighter that they hired in 1966. As a little kid, all I remember is when the fire whistle would blow, he would run to his car, whatever he was driving at the time, jump in it and take off. Back in the day, we watched Batman on TV, and Gus had a black convertible, and he jumped into the convertible and went down the road, and I swear the flames came out the back of it just like the Batmobile. A few other people that I would ride my bike down to my bus stop to watch. One of them sitting here in the group today, Bruce McAllister and John Hander. Every single time the call would happen, they would come racing up around the corner from the boatyard where they were working. And I just thought that was the coolest thing when I was 7, 8 years old. And here I am. I got to work a full career at the fire department as a paramedic, lieutenant. I did it all. Got to do some really cool stuff in my years and get out of it in one piece, which is something that everybody should try to do. My interest in the photography started a long time ago when I went to the fire station and there were just a few pictures hanging on the wall. And those pictures and the discussions and stories that took place just caught my attention all the way along. And as soon as I had access to a camera, I started taking pictures and trying to preserve some of the history. So that's kind of how it all started. We used to have a newspaper that covered the stories on a regular basis. If there was something was on fire or a bad crash, they were there to get pictures of it. It was in the newspaper, which we sort of are lacking today, unfortunately, but if there's anybody out there who has old pictures of their family members or fires or trucks or anything like that, that's kind of historic, we'd love to see them someday. I want to recognize the little lady in the corner over here, Robin. She was the first female firefighter, fire department employee that was hired in 1982 as a dispatcher. She was an EMT. She taught hundreds of people CPR over the years, taught EMT classes eventually. Back when we started going from non-computer to computer, it was Robin that programmed every street in the district into the computer with directions from 3 different stations. And she did it while she was already working. That was not on overtime. So Robin's got a great career under her belt as well. The lower right-hand corner is, I don't know if that's because the chief just said something to her, or I just said something to her, or somebody on the phone just said something to her, but we saw that off. Robin happened to catch a lot of the big fires that we had. She worked during Hurricane Bob. We had young kids at the time. So that was an interesting couple of weeks of experience. She was on duty the night that Provincetown burned down Whalers Wharf. She took the first couple of calls on Crosby Yacht Yard and the computer crashed. And she had to go off her memory and experience to make that night happen, which was probably the biggest experience in this district in a long time. Had a bad fire at the Cape Cod Animal Hospital one night. She was on that one. And she got to handle a lot of different calls, good and bad. My whole point of putting this up here is give her a little round of applause. Would you do that? Throughout it all, she stuck around 43 years counting. So we're here today to kind of recognize COMM Fire. Our great new 2026 patch, kind of celebrating the experience. This department today is a very different department than what I grew up with, as is most of our world. They do have fire calls, obviously, paramedic level EMS calls, hazardous materials. We have several boats and there's a dive team and a lot of other things, not to mention fire prevention and education and different stuff. So there's quite a team that's involved in making all that happen. The area that we protect is about 26 square miles, 28,000 population, but it jumps way up in the summertime. Last year, they did 5,373 calls, which is a very busy department. We're about the 5th busiest on the Cape. 75% of people's calls are for EMS calls. So the ambulance doing its thing, transported 2,600 people to the hospital last year. So that's the main work that most people are doing these days is provide EMS. In addition to that, lots of fire alarms, an occasional house fires, some brush fires, car fires, things like that. In 1950, it was a very different place, pretty quiet. 1975, which was the year that I started, was the first year that we went over 1,000 calls, which was kind of a big deal back in the day. And that has steadily grown over the years. It doesn't take too long to add up the calls. The people who lead the department today, this is Chief Pat Hill, who's standing back there with his son. And Deputy Chief Mike Rogers, who's here someplace. And then we have 2 fire prevention officers, an EMS officer, 4 shift captains who kind of run their groups, and then 12 lieutenants. Working with them is 32 firefighters, and any and all of those people have EMS training. So some of them are paramedics, some of them are EMTs, all working together, all providing the service for you. Like I said, a lot of it's EMS, but when there's a fire, everybody turns up. Making that happen, there's 4 full-time dispatchers and 3 part-time dispatchers. And then there's kind of a support team. There's the ladies upstairs that make everything happen as far as organizing the business end of the fire department. We have a maintenance guy and a mechanic that keep the apparatus in shape, keep the stations in shape. So altogether, there's about 65 people. And good news is we just got authorized to hire 16 more people over the next 2 years because we need them. Because the last time that they increased staffing was back when it was about 2,000 runs a year as opposed to 5,000. Doing a little catch up. The basic way that the fire department works is there are 4 groups of people with 12 on a group. They work a 24-hour shift, so come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, work 24 hours, go home for 24 hours, come back for another 24, and then have 5 days off. It averages out to like a 42-hour week, but they're working their 48 hours of work, and in that time, they could be doing dozens of calls. So it's a pretty busy outfit. We have 3 fire stations. The main headquarters station is in Centerville. It's built in 1990. Has all the offices for fire prevention, the chief, the deputy, dispatch, the fire district itself. Normal staffing is the shift officer who's incident commander, probably a lieutenant, and then up to 6 people total that would go out the door, and the dispatcher. This is what dispatch looks like in Centerville currently. This is a brand new console, went in last year. It's pretty much all electronic and computer driven. We also dispatch for Katuitt Fire Department and always have, so that gets added in. So about 6,500 calls a year go through our specific dispatch. When you call 911, it goes to the Brownsville Police Department, and then they transfer the call to us, and we take the information and send out the fire departments. Up the street here in Osterville is a relatively new fire station that is usually staffed by 3 members, and they may go out on the ambulance and there's nobody in town, or they may go out on the fire engine, the same thing. So there's just 3 people basically taking care of Osterville most of the time. Same thing at Marstons Mills, that's a pretty new fire station. They have some of the modern fleet of apparatus that's around, some of the best trucks that can be used. This is a Pierce Quantum engine, which carries 750 gallons of water, can pump 1,500 gallons a minute, has ladders and all the tools and hose and stuff that is needed to fight any kind of fire that would happen. So we have 2 trucks that are kind of older and are on replacement schedule, and 2 trucks that are about halfway through their lifespan. This is one of the ones that will be replaced. The other 2 engines look the same, they just newer. One of the 4 engines is our rescue engine. We call it Rescue 1. It carries the Jaws of Life, some other specialized rescue equipment that can be used for car accidents or any other kind of significant type of a call. This is the ladder truck. It's called a Quint. Quint means it basically has 5 major components. It has a pump, tank, carries hose, has ground ladders, and it also has an aerial ladder, which can reach up to 105 feet up in the air. It has a pipe that runs up it, so the ladder pipe can work if you have to put out a major fire. This is a very good piece of apparatus. It served us very well for a long time. It's being replaced. The new truck is on orders. We have a couple brush trucks. This is the primary brush truck. It's kept in Marstons Mills. Most of our work is the ambulance. So this is the Centerville ambulance, which is just a couple years old. We have a brand new ambulance here in Osterville and a brand new one in Marstons Mills. One of the older trucks is being kept around in case something that needs to be taken out of service. This is the main rescue boat called Marine 1. It was kept down at the dock by Crosby Yacht. We probably do a dozen or more calls for boat rescues a year, at least. So that's kind of the department where we're at today. I'm gonna go back and talk a little bit about before we had a fire department, because that's what the history part is all about. Those of you who might not be familiar with where we are, this is Cape Cod, obviously 15 towns. The town of Barnstable right there in the middle is the largest of the towns, somewhere around 62 square miles. That was established way back in 1639. They went, this is our 250th year of the country. They went 257 years without having a fire department after the town, which is kind of an amazing amount of time to think about. But here we are. Those who know the villages, and Paul Chesbrough is here, and he's the historian of Osterville. I get a lot of information out of his books because he's one of the few that documented things well. But Osterville and Centerville and the other villages were very special, independent places at one time. They took care of themselves. They were the same families for generations. Each village had its own personality and some character, I guess you'd call it, over the years. Luckily, we are in Osterville, which is probably the best village. When there was a fire, before there was a fire department, somebody would run up to town to one of the churches and ring the bell, which I guess got people's attention and woke people up out of bed and get them started. They would come running with whatever they had, buckets, a couple fire extinguishers, rakes, whatever they had. Try to salvage anything that they could out of a house, bedding, whatever, whatever they could. It was not always good. You needed a fire department back in the day. There was no such thing. One of the major fires in history is the Cottachester House, which is where the Wiano Club is today. So this big hotel was built like in the 1873 era. It was fully occupied in the middle of July in 1887, and it caught on fire. So 6:30 in the morning, people are sleeping. One of the staff at the hotel noticed that there was fire on the third floor and started getting everybody evacuated. There wasn't electricity, there weren't phones, and there wasn't a paved road. Somebody rode their bike uptown to ring the bells to let people know. Fortunately, everybody was able to get out. The place was burned to the ground. You know, imagine the Wiano Club being burned to the ground in 2 hours. So kind of a big incident in town. And they started rebuilding it. There wasn't much left. Right here where the library stands was Israel Crocker's house and barn. Lightning storm one afternoon hit the barn and apparently caught into flame immediately, and it was a big battle. And Paul's books describe it wonderfully. I'm not going to, but he talks about how people got their eyebrows singed, and it was a tough battle to protect the surrounding buildings when that happened. Another little mention is Samuel Ames. So Samuel Ames was an undertaker in the village for like 30 or 40 years. Also served as a deputy sheriff. And I think he might have been part of a informal fire department back in that time. He lived down on East Bay Road, across from like where the East Bay Lodge used to be. His undertaker garage caught on fire when Dave burned to the ground. Interestingly, that's the father of the first fire chief. So in the 1908 era, there was a thing called the Osterville Village Improvement Society. And they were kind of doing different things to make the village look good and doing things with signs and things like that. They bought 18 fire extinguishers and they kind of distributed them around the village. Put them in people's houses and things like that. So if something was on fire any place in the village, somebody could come running with something that would maybe help. Somewhere along the line, 1911-ish, Walter Fuller, who ran the store, I believe that is now Fancy's, is one of the successful businessmen in town, and he kind of got together with the Osterville Village Improvement Society, and they bought a fire apparatus. I don't know if this is what it looked like, but this is the type of thing of that era. Was not motorized, it was pulled by hand, had about 60 gallons of water. And what they did is you mixed an acid and a base together, and it created pressure. Like if you shake up a soda can, it created pressure that made the hose able to squirt, and that's kind of what they had. They didn't have an organized fire department, so they had no place to really keep this. It ended up in the garage that is behind Midway Garage right now. When you get your car inspected, I think that's where the fire truck, if you want to call it, was kept. Where the Midway Garage is currently is a guy named Foster Lewis had his house right there. There's part of the story coming up for that. If you look out the window over here, where the tennis courts are currently, where the Osterville Bay School had been, that was originally the Osterville School. This is the beautiful school. It was built in 1912. November 24th of 1914, somebody driving by saw it was on fire. By the time people got word of it, it was a firestorm. The embers and the sparks and all that stuff was all blowing towards what we would call the Vets Hall today, setting everything in between on fire. There was grass fires going, it was setting roofs on fire, and could have burned the village down. And it was all just the regular people like you and I that came out and did everything they could to prevent that from happening. So that was pretty neat. But beautiful old school. This is Mr. Lewis's house. So picture that being right where Midway Garage is, and then the building behind it is where the garage was that had various purposes over time, but that's where they kept the little fire truck. Foster Lewis's house caught on fire in the middle of the night in the winter in 1921. It was very cold. Everything was frozen, including the fire apparatus that was basically useless, even though it was in the backyard. So it didn't help. Cotuit had the first motorized fire truck. It was a 1916 Model T. And they had to call for Cotuit to come over to help Osterville back in the day. And it was quite a trip, I'd imagine, coming over when it was below freezing in a Model T with no windshield to come over to a fully evolved house. But that sort of embarrassed the village enough that they started talking about, we need to have a fire department. One of Paul's books describes, I don't know if it's a letter to the editor or what it was, but describes why we needed a fire. This is not an Osterville, but this building was very important in us having a fire district. So this is called the Normal School. It was a state teachers college that was brand new, just opened up. It was on the campus of what's now Town Hall. So the building in the center is Town Hall. That's the circle that still exists today. The building on the left is where the telephone company building, I believe, is still there. That is the building that burned. So caught on fire. Hyannis did not have a fire department at that point either. So it must have been quite a night to watch that thing. But that got people talking. So the people in Hyannis went to the town that had already appointed fire wards, which is basically some volunteers in each of the villages that were sort of in charge of organizing people if and when there was a fire, primarily a brush fire, but that type of thing. Hyannis went to the town, went to town meeting, said, hey, we want a fire department. Town meeting unanimously voted it down, did not approve it. So there's legislation in the state general laws, Massachusetts general laws, chapter 48, that describes how you can form a municipality within a municipality. So if you wanted to create a fire district within a town, you have to go through this process, which Hyannis was able to do. And in May of 1896, they established the Hyannis Fire District, which sort of set everything up for why we have fire districts in our town as opposed to a town fire department. It was about 30 years later that Centerville and Osterville somehow got together. They were talking, I don't know why they decided to join, because they're two different villages that had different personalities and quite a bit different in every way. But they got together and they went through the same process of the chapter 48, and they established what became the Centerville-Osterville Fire Department, or Fire District, which was a lot smaller than it is today. It didn't include most of Marstons Mills. That was brought in afterwards, but they did provide the protection for Marstons Mills pretty much all the way along. Ultimately, over time, we ended up with 5 different fire districts, which some people question and they wonder why that would be, but it's worked out very well, I think, for everybody in each of those fire districts. Today, there are 7 fire stations in 7 villages operated by the 5 different fire departments. Altogether, the 5 departments do about 16,000 calls a year. So it's a small city. We work together a lot. This gentleman is Charles Lincoln Ailey, who was a very successful businessman. He lived in Centerville. If you go over the Centerville-Osterville Bridge, the second house on the right, the big red brick house, I believe is where he lives. He was involved in starting Cape Cod Hospital. If you know the Ailing wing at Cape Cod Hospital, it was named after him. Somehow he got involved in saying we need a fire department in Centerville, and they got to talking with Osterville somehow, and he ended up becoming the first Prudential Committee chairman, kind of the boss, getting the fire district started back in 1926. So they had their first meeting at the Vets Hall, which used to be called Union Hall. Had an election. They elected the Board of Fire Engineers, Fire Chief, other members. And this is Bernard S. Ames, who I believe is the first fire chief from 1926 to 1950. They approved money for 2 lots of land, about $500 for Osterville, which is the same location that the Osterville Fire Station is today, and $200 for the land in Centerville. They allocated $20,000 to build 2 fire stations. Imagine, we couldn't even advertise for that today for that much. They built a station in Osterville, and they built a station in Centerville. They had about $19,000 to spend on fire trucks. They bought 2 maximum 500-gallon-a-minute pumpers that were built in Middleborough, Massachusetts. And they kind of put together a fire department with 18 guys in Centerville and 18 guys in Osterville, volunteers, and or what's called call firemen. So they pay volunteers. They get a little bit of money, but it's not why they're doing it. They were doing it because they needed the service in the villages. So once again, comparing today to then, they started in January of 1926, and by the end of 1926, they had 2 fire stations, 2 fire trucks, and 2 crews of guys, and they did 6 calls that year. So, pretty good start. The fellow on the left is Charlie Lowe. Some of you might remember Charlie Lowe. He started out when he was about 15 years old in the fire department and retired when they basically made him at 65. So he's got the longest continuous record of service, I believe, on this department, and nobody will ever pass that. This picture I actually stole out of Paul Chesbro's book because I couldn't get the original. I've never seen this before. But if you look at this station, it looks very much like what the Centerville station looked like. There was a door that doesn't exist, and this was actually extended over time. That, I believe, is the siren that they put up on a metal tower out back. It was basically just a garage. I'm not even sure it was heated well, but it had heat, so things didn't freeze. Kind of a nice looking station, you know, had 2 doors, and the trucks that are shown here are actually Town of Barnstable Forest Fire Department trucks. So the truck in the middle is a 1922 Dodge that one of those fire wards named Robert Cross, who lived in Osterville, put together. He had a little pump on it, 150 gallons of water, 2,000 feet of hose that they could drag off and put out brush fires and grass fires and things. I think that truck lived with the Maxim in that fire station in the very beginning. That was the second truck in the station. And if Robert Cross wasn't there, certainly one of the other firemen that was in that station would have taken the truck. The truck on the left, the brush breaker, I'll talk about a little bit more, and then the truck on the right is called a patrol truck, and it was part of the preventing brush fires from happening back in the day. This has always been one of my favorite pictures of that station. It's just a great shot of all those trucks. back about 1949, they added on to the building a little bit to make some more room. The trucks were getting bigger. They needed a couple more trucks and things were growing, so they put on a little bit of a garage. That building right there had 5 trucks in it back when I was, well, not when I was starting, but when it started. Building was added on to in 1963. And this is the station that I basically remember when I was starting out. You can see that they had added, there's the door that wasn't there anymore. They added on a tower to put the horn a little bit higher up in the village so that people could hear it better throughout the village. So in the old part of the station, when I started on the department, that's where we kept the ambulances. There were 2 ambulances there and a pickup truck, and then we had the engines and things on the other side. So ladder truck, pumper, a large pumper, and a brush breaker behind it. And that station provided good service to the village for about 82 years altogether. It was a little tired at the end, but I'm sorry to see it go. It smelled like a fire station, felt like a fire station, looked like a fire station, and it was a great place to be. This is the Centerville station, same basic design. Those of you who are familiar with like Four Seas ice cream, this is the one that's right next to Four Seas or behind Four Seas. If you noticed on the picture of the Osterville station, it said Osterville Fire Department. You notice on the Centerville Fire Station, it says Centerville Fire Department. Imagine 2 brothers that didn't necessarily get along all that well together. They want to take care of things by themselves. They don't need any help. That was kind of the department that Chief Farrington inherited, which was 2 different departments that worked together occasionally, but they were very much independent, and you knew it. If you were an Austin guy and you wanted an into Centerville, you got looked at funny. Just the way it was. Back of that station had a little apartment in it and a little kitchen, and somebody lived in that building all the time to answer the phone. If you lived at Centerville and you had an emergency, you called a specific number that went to Centerville, and they handled their own calls. Same type of thing happened in Austin. It was the way it was. Some of the trucks that they had back in the 50s. And this is what it looked like pretty much up until moving day in 1990. The back of the station was added on to several times. That's after 64 years, those are the trucks that were there. Those trucks moved into the new station when it opened. Most of you are probably familiar with the Centerville station. So the old trucks moved into the new station. That was a big deal. It was a very big deal back in the day. That station was called the Taj Mahal. It was so huge. It's existed now for 36 years, and they're just getting to the point where they're starting to look at some challenges as far as space. But that was 3 million, Chief? Is that what?
3.6.
So 3.6 million built that building back in 1989, 90. It's a great value. That turned out very, very good investment for the district. In Marstons Mills in 1975, they never had a fire station. They built a metal building up on the hill at Lovell's Lane and Route 149, which stuck around for 28 years. Most of the time it was unstaffed. I think the last 4 years we actually moved in there and we kind of made do in the station. It was kind of a fun place to work, especially when we're just 3 of you hanging out in a little building without any facilities. It was fun. We had a lot of good times there. And got to go to a lot of calls. The fellow in the middle of the truck, that's Charlie Lowell. And I'm not sure who the guy is that's standing by the door. Somebody knew his name, but I don't know. But if you look at the old, this is probably the oldest picture that we have. That door opened out like a barn door as opposed to an overhead door. So the trucks were identical, engine 1 and engine 2. One in Osterville, one in Centerville. Those of you that came in the front door would have seen this truck parked out there today. This is a 1934. The truck was built by Chief Ames and Carl Stark in that garage behind where Midway is. So literally built a fire truck in Osterville that served in our district, which is pretty neat. It had a small pump on it, 750 gallons a minute with a little tank of water, carried some ladders, carried some tools, and it was assigned in Centerville for about 12 years, up until about 1942, when they got rid of it and it became Mashpee's first fire truck. And it served the town of Mashpee for quite a few years, then it disappeared. And it was gone for a long time, and then a few years back, somebody contacted us that the truck privately owned had been completely fixed, and they wanted to know if we wanted to get it back. So in 2017, the Firemen's Association bought that truck, brought it home. Only a couple guys who know how to drive it, and one of them is Gus Riley, who's out here, who brought it here today. It's parked out front. I hope you take a good look at it before it goes back home again. And so that's the oldest existing Centerville-Osterville fire truck. Another truck that was built in Osterville by Chief Ames and Carl Stark. So this was became engine 4. It was a truck that went into Centerville. It's the first truck that had a radio. Prior to that, the fire trucks didn't have any radios. It was kind of a new thing. The whistle would blow, people would go to the fire station. Somebody had written on a chalkboard what the address was. You'd get in the truck and you would just go to the fire, and there was like no talk on the radio. Eventually, chiefs got radios. Some of the forest fire trucks had radios, but it was a long time before the department actually had a radio. So this truck had a bigger tank of water, could pump a little bit more. It was primarily for brush fires and things, but this truck would be the truck that would attack any fire. So it probably went out the door first, went to the front of the house, would start putting out the fire while the pumper, the older truck, would go find a water source, whether it be a hydrant or draft water out of the pond or the lake or the bay or whatever the case might have been. So it looks like they're spraying a lot of water. There's 5 different hose lines. That's about 100 gallons a minute. So this is like 20 gallons. It's a garden hose and a half. But if you put water in the right place at the right time, it does a lot of work. So kind of a nice truck. 1950, those original Maxim were replaced by these Ford cab Maxim pumpers that were built in Middleborough again, 500 gallon a minute pumps, 500 gallons of water. And they were around for a good part of our history. Those trucks were replaced in like 1968 and 69 by a little bit newer version, the truck on the left, which had 1,000 gallon minute pump and 500 gallons of water. So there was one of those in Osterville, there was one of those in Centerville. So some of my first visits to the fire station, this is what I grew up with. Patrol truck on the right. There was an ambulance. We call it the old one, the old 1950 pumper, a 1963 International pumper, a rescue truck that was called Squad 2 or 302, and then a big brush bagger. And all those trucks lived in the Osterville station, and you could staff all of them with the guys who were on the department. There were about 30 call people on the department at the time, assigned just to Osterville, and you could put those things all on the road. It was pretty cool. Probably my favorite truck of all time. This was the first modern truck that the department bought. 1975 Mack pumper, 1,250 gallon minute pump, 1,000 gallons of water, a foam system. It was the first diesel. It was the first truck with an automatic transmission. It was the first truck that had a deck gun. It had 1,200 feet of 4-inch diameter hose. It was a firefighting truck. This truck was awesome to work off of, awesome to ride on and drive. And it stuck around for a while. Eventually it got refurbished, took on a little different look, but it stuck around up until not too long ago. That was my seat, right behind the captain. Whoever was up front, I sat behind him, and my odds of getting a chance to be the nozzle guy were pretty good if I was in the right place at the right time. In 1976, they bought a ladder truck, the first ladder truck the department ever had. The chief, who was chief back in 1951, said we needed a ladder truck in 1951. It was until 1976 that they actually spent the money to get one. So the first Chief Ames his big concern was brush fires. Back in those days, they would have large forest fires that would burn hundreds or thousands of acres of forest, a lot of it up near Otis and Sandwich and Bourne. But it threatened coming into our town, and our Chief Ames was the forest fire warden for our town. And he did everything he could to prevent fires from happening in our town come here. One of his biggest concerns. In those days, you didn't have much to work with. It was, you dragged a hose into the woods, that was it, or some rakes and tools. He came up with an idea that sort of revolutionized the Cape. And he built a thing that ended up being called the brush breaker. So once there was vehicles that were strong enough, powerful enough, and big enough to carry 800 gallons of water. In that same garage next door to the fire station behind Midway, they built this thing. It had a pump that drove the truck, obviously. It had a motor that drove the truck. It had a motor separate that operated the pump. So the truck could drive along with a pump going and spray water out of hoses from the truck to put the fire out. Instead of chasing after it, you could go after it with the truck. So kind of a novel idea that took on. At one time, there were probably 20 brush breakers on Cape Cod. Today, it's hard to find one. There aren't as many fires either, so that's a good thing. Part of the story that goes with that truck is they were painting it in April of 1937, so it was brand new. It was being painted in that same building, and Hyannis had a fire. They had a brush fire up on by Ridgewood Avenue, so basically up by where the airport is today. I think it burned like 1,200 acres. It was a big fire. The truck went. They had no experience driving that truck to fire. It got stuck. So the first fire that it went to, basically, they burned all the tires off. It kind of burned up all the brand new paint. But they put that thing back in service again, and it worked up until it was replaced by a very similar truck in 1952. So that truck fought fire all over Cape Cod, Plymouth County, wherever there were fires, and there were plenty of fires back in those days. So that's Chief Hallett, would be the man on the right, and Deputy Chief Herbert Coombs, I believe, is on the left. So that truck was in Osterville for until 1967, when it got replaced by a newer truck. So the basic concept of the brush breaker is it's got the bars in the front. You could actually push trees or brush out of the way if you needed to. It protected the truck from being damaged while you went after the fire. If you could get to the fire before it got big, you could put it out. If it got too big, it was an all-day thing. You threatened a lot of houses and businesses and things like that. So you wanted to get to the fire and put it out before it got big. This is just a grass fire, but it shows kind of an example of how the truck works. It would drive along with guys standing on top of it that would spray water, kind of catch the side fire to make sure that it didn't continue to burn. And eventually the fire would go out. In 1967, the town of Boswell bought this truck to replace that prior truck. In 1975 and thereabouts, the Forest Fire Department went out of business, and the Centerville-Osterville district bought this truck for $1, I believe. Just basically took over maintenance of it, and it stuck around for 48 years. So that truck went to a lot of fires. Its last fire was in Mashpee, I think. Had a little incident and got damaged enough that they couldn't fix it. Osterville started its first rescue squad in 1950. Basic first aid and just a bunch of guys who wanted to help out. They eventually bought a new ambulance in 1965. They had 2 of these, one in Osterville, one in Centerville. Just kind of basic, simple first aid. Put them in the ambulance and transport them to the hospital. And there you are, Bruce. So Bruce McAllister, Mac Pulowski, Eddie Marney, and John Kanda. So if you had to pick a crew, you were in good shape with those guys. Those guys were first to the fire station a lot. And they would either be on the ambulance or they'd be on the fire truck, and that was a good team back in the day. Centerville guys, same thing. They had guys that showed up and were kind of the regulars that you always could count on. On the left is Craig Whiteley, on the right is Phil Field. Those were the first two paramedics that Cape and Islands EMS trained and had belonged to the Centerville-Osterville Fire Department. So when they became the first paramedics, they were the first in the state. The paramedics on Cape Cod were the first paramedics anywhere in Massachusetts. Some of you who might have been around back in the day, emergency was such an important show on TV that inspired generations of people like myself that went on to become paramedics, because the firefighters got to go to the fires, the paramedics got to go to everything. I wanted to go to everything. The Firemen's Association raised money and bought the first kind of modern ambulance in 1974. CNO Volunteers, which is now the COMM Firefighters Association. So that ambulance went into Centerville. A couple of years later, the brand new ambulance in the kind of style of today is the boxed ambulance, where the paramedics and the EMTs in the back have enough room to work and take care of patients. If you haven't been in the back of an ambulance yet, they don't look like that anymore, but that's what the 1976 ambulance looked like. I spent a lot of days in that ambulance. As time went by, they bought a couple new ambulances. Eventually, we bought, I think, 3 generations of fleets of ambulances, 3 identical trucks that lasted about 10 years apiece. Somewhere about 1995, I believe, we started painting our trucks red and black. So this is one of the red and black versions of our ambulance. So this is H. Manley Crosby, Horace Manley Crosby III, known as Uncle Gus, a Marine who retired and was hired as our first full-time firefighter. He lived across the street from me, and I'm here because of him. No question about it. I believe this to be Chief Ames. So that picture was taken in 1962. He died in 64, about 77 years old. So that would have been after he was retired, but he was the first chief that kind of got things organized. There was an acting chief for a short time until a different election was held, at which time they hired Charlie Hallett. And these chiefs back in the day, they were elected by the general public. So people like yourselves that went to an election in the district would have elected the fire chief and the engineers. Somebody else followed him briefly, and then Chief Stanley Buckler served from 1961 to about 1973. That's him standing in the middle. Another little acting chief briefly, and then along came Chief Barrington in 1973. He was 23 years old when he was elected. So he was very young by comparison, walking into a department that had a bunch of old guys who were all sort of set in their way, and 2 different stations with 2 different departments with a lot of different issues. So he rode the bucking bronco his entire career of 40 years being the chief as the department modernized. We got new stations, new equipment, went from a call department with only just a small handful of full-time people to a department that today is all full-time personnel. So he deserves a little round of applause as well. This is Chief Barrington in the middle with the Centerville guys. So a couple of them are full-time firefighters. The rest of them were call firefighters back in the day. And this was the Osterville crew. These are the guys that I got to work with. A lot of great people in that picture. I thought this was kind of cool. This is the pay sheet. They had a fire in Centerville in 1973, November of 73. It was run down at 694. We do about that many calls a month now. So that was almost a year's worth of calls. That's how many people showed up in Osterville to go to a house fire in Centerville. So probably 4 or 5 guys were on the truck. The rest of them were drinking coffee in the fire station. The department had always been the Centerville-Osterville Fire Department. CNO was kind of our name. In 1986, some of the guys from Marston's Mills kind of made a little stir. And we're able to get the name changed to Centerville-Osterville-Marstons Fire Department, which happened in 1986. So now that's why we go by COMM. Marstons Mills Station had been unstaffed until 1999. We hired 12 people, so that gives you 3 people, a group for 4 different groups. So we hired 12 brand new guys, and we opened up Marstons Mills. And that was kind of the end of the call of fire department. So all of our staffing was full-time people. We covered all 3 stations, and we could get it done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, a really great group of people. There's only a couple of them that are still working. A lot of those guys have retired, and a couple of them aren't here anymore. This is a 2014 department photo that was taken in front of the station, so a good bunch of people as well. Another changing of the guard. So Chief Farrington served up until 2013. He was followed by Chief Michael Wynn for about 10 years. When Mike Wynn retired, Deputy Chief Byron Eldridge at the time took over chief for about a year. And then Chief Hill, who is here today, took over and is currently running the department. And there's the 4 chiefs, 53 years worth of being a chief at the time altogether. Dispatch in the Osterville station, the dispatch is the most important person in the firehouse. They greet the people that come through the door, they answer the phone, they talk on the radio, they send people out, they turn chaos into order. And it can be a busy operation, especially back in the old days. And also when you're all by yourself, and they were 5 different telephones, and they could all be ringing at the same time. One of the Chief Farrington's first moves was to build a new console. That's what it looked like back in the 70s and 80s. Going back to the forest fire days, there were several fire towers on Cape Cod. You put a guy up in the tower and he would look to see if there's any smoke. If he spotted a smoke, he would line it up in his tower. It was a compass, and he could line it up. He would call the fire station by phone or by radio, and he would say, "I'm seeing some smoke on a particular line." This map was inside the dispatch center, and that's the Barnstable Tower, and that's the Sandwich Tower. There was another one at Falmouth. So whoever could see the fire would give you their line. So Barnstable Tower could see it, and Sandwich Tower could see it. Wherever those 2 lines crossed, that's probably pretty close to wherever the fire was. And that's how that technology works. Pretty simple. Yes, we did have a fire dog. So a white Dalmatian with blue uniform pants, you can just imagine, but that's Blazer the fire dog in the dispatch center. And that's Donnie Varnum, who was one of our original 4 civilian dispatchers in 1980. Somebody would call up and report a fire or a rescue, whatever the case would have been. You pull out the car. This went to the dumpster, and I went to the dumpster right after it and brought it home. So there's a little evidence, but you pull out a card. On the front, it would tell you what to send. On the back, it had a map that would show you. So there's what you would send. It would show you on the back a little map where the fire hydrants were, and you could get your directions and things like that. So, all right, this is my favorite part of the whole show. Hopefully, we'll see how it goes. But on the console, if you had a call, you pushed that button and it rang a bell, a loud bell. Everybody knew there was something happening. You pushed this and all the lights in the fire station came on. So if they were sleeping, they were awake. You'd flip a switch. That's Osterville, Centerville, and Marstons Mills. So depending on who was going to go, you flipped those switches on and you pushed that yellow button, and you better know that you need to push it, because once you push it, it's committed. The light would come on and it would make a noise. So on the fire station, there was a horn. Down by the ball field behind home plate was a pole with a siren on top of it. This is what got to that. This little mechanism goes way back in the department's history, and this is how the horn is blown. There's a little key. It's got 1 It's got 1, 2, 3 notches on it, and then space. Spring loaded, and it's, when you push this down, that started to turn, which turned that, which made the horn blow. Here we go. You getting children? Those of us who grew up in the village, that meant everything. The whole town woke up, everybody knew there was something happening. There were people driving like idiots, there were people that were driving very responsibly to get to the fire station as fast as we could from home or work. Because we wanted to get on the truck and go to the fire. Or the rescue or whatever it happened to be. Pretty close to what it sounded like.
Video rescue.
Yeah. Eventually people complained, imagine. So when we're all said and done, typewriter, remember typewriters, you could type up the daily log and or put the calls in there as to what was going on. Still gets me going. Oh, who's that guy? Well, once upon a time, that was I. So they hired me as a dispatcher, so I got to make all that noise, which was pretty cool back in the day. And for one reason or another, they let me back in the door last year, and I occasionally help out in Centerville without so much hair. So getting close to the end here. There were some big fires in Osterville over the years. So the West Bay Inn, if you went about not even a half mile, you went down to Eel River Road and West Bay Road, someplace right on South Bay, there was the West Bay Inn. Big hotel, 65 rooms, built in 1905. It was just a summer hotel, had nice breeze come in all the time. It was apparently a pretty nice place to visit. In October of 1935, it caught fire, and apparently it was so spectacular that Paul's books say thousands of people came to watch the fire. And it burned for 11 hours and didn't leave anything, so it could have been thousands of people that showed up to see it. I remember hearing stories about the trucks that were drafting water. You know, the tide went out, the tide came in while they were pumping and stuff, so the trucks were stuck in the mud. It must have been quite something. If you look out that window in the middle of town where what I would remember as Hanson's, this real estate shop that's right in the middle of Leano Ave and Main Street, is the building. This one, that's the Daniel block. So like, you know, Peggy's store when I was a kid. So Bob Sims had opened the first house and garden, I believe, in that building at some point in time, and then it became Bob's Sporting Goods Shop when the house and garden moved up the street just a little bit farther to where it is today. So that's probably what the building looked like when it caught fire. This is what it looked like the morning afterwards. The guys fought fire all night long, 5 2.5-inch hose lines, so that's 250 gallons a minute for each of those hoses, plus 10.5-inch, which is about 100 gallons a minute. For 5 hours is a lot of pumping. That fire threatened the entire village as well. Kind of a big fire, a lot of damage. Growing up, the biggest fire that was ever in this district that I knew of was Oyster Harvest Club. Big hotel on Oyster Harvest Island. I think it was being torn down at the time or renovated, depending on how you read it, but Paul's book kind of talks about it a little bit. It caught fire in a big way. I'm in 3rd grade. I'm 8 years old in 1969. We come around the corner in my school bus, and all you could see from like where the Historical Society is was the big cloud of black smoke. It was filling the sky. This thing was ripping. I already wanted to go to the fire when I was 8 years old. I run home to get my bike. My mother says, no, you need a haircut. I'm going like, fire, fire. I had to go get my haircut at the A&P barber shop, watching trucks going up the street. Eventually, I got to go and see what was left, which was not much. But that was when I learned that I wanted to go to the fire, one way or another. And that was a big one. Some of the pictures up on the boards kind of reflect the work that happened. Much different day, no deck guns. They didn't have a lot of water. It was not a lot of help. This would have gone to like 11 alarms today. I think Centerville-Osterville and Katuitt and Hyannis handled it. If you look out that direction, this is the work basket, which is like the first building on the left on Miano Avenue after you go past West Bay Road. Middle of the night, 1977. So that nice Mack fire truck pulled up with the deck gun on that truck and put this fire out like almost instantly, knocked it down really, really quick. Middle of the night in 1981, somebody came running into the fire station in Osterville, woke up the dispatcher and said, hey, the community center's on fire. There was nobody on duty in the fire station other than the dispatcher. They made that noise and everybody came running, and I ended up driving the first engine, that Mack, to the fire, and went to 2 alarms, maybe 3 alarms, but we lost our community center that day. Then there was December 10th of 2003. Robin was working. I was off duty. I picked up my son at the South Congregational Church in Centerville. He was a Boy Scout. He stopped by the station, said hi to Mom. Went home. This is where I grew up. This is right next to where I lived and played as a kid. My dad worked in these buildings. All my relatives worked in these buildings. 9:30 at night. Me being me, I grabbed my camera as I came out of my house. Actually, first I came out of the house looking to see where the fire was. She had announced it as if it was the main boatyard. I didn't see anything. I looked just a little ways over, and this was already happening. This is fully involved, 300 by 100-foot building instantly. Then I grabbed my camera and my turnout gear, went back in the house, called Robin and said, tell him it's a 3rd alarm. The chief authorized the 3rd alarm, and we got a lot of people moving before anybody even got there, but there was no question about this. This was huge. Wintertime, all the Miano seniors, all the other boats that were stored in there, and they lost pretty much everything. A lot of history that burned up that night. I did not take many of these pictures. I ended up fighting the fire as much as I could, camera on hip when possible, but there's a number of different people who saw this fire and obviously came out to take some pictures and see it. When all was said and done, we lost 4 buildings, but they were able to save some important stuff. So these boats were right up against the building that was burning. They saved those. They actually saved the framing for the Miano seniors that was around for decades. Uncle Max used to work on that to build Miano seniors back in the day. That frame was up against the building and they saved it, which was kind of cool. The fire extended over a little bit into the Oyster Harbors Marine, so this is that side of things. They lost the building and it threatened a lot of boats on that side. Hot spot to be. Jason was driving the fire truck that was made the attack on the fire from that side that night. I'm sure it's pretty spectacular. It was very long. A couple days later, I went up in an airplane and got some pictures. It was pretty totaled. But interestingly, there was a little bit of snow on the ground from a couple of days before that, which kept some of the embers and things that were flying through the air from catching anything else on fire. It didn't spread, there was no wind, so it didn't really spread either way. So we lucked out in a lot of ways, even though we lost what was on fire when they got there. It could have been much, much worse if that had happened in the summertime with a different kind of wind, or whatever the case would have been. Robin and I moved from Crosby Circle, we're closer to the neighborhood, call for a fire at the bank, right next door again. So the guys got there pretty quick and made quick work of that, and they actually saved the bank one afternoon, a couple years back. A little bit of water in the right place at the right time makes a lot of difference. But basically, there's been a lot of activity. If you stayed in this library for 100 years, you can't imagine the things that burned within sight or within walking distance of this place. And that's just in Osterville. The same kind of thing would happen in Centerville. There were plenty of fires in Marstons Mills and everywhere else. Like I said, most of the work that guys do today is in the back of an ambulance, which is providing important care for everybody. Not quite as many fires, but they still happen. They still have to be ready for them. We've got good equipment, good people. Everything going our way, and hopefully, as time goes by, our history line will continue, and people will continue to document things as time goes by. And when the 200th anniversary happens, somebody else can take over my job. So I whipped through a bunch of stuff. There's more information available. That's the district's website. They have an awesome website now. A lot of information. I've been doing a website for 25 years called CapeCodFD.com, which has everything you ever would have wanted to know about the fire departments on Cape Cod. You're welcome to go there anytime if you choose to. A nice picture to end on. This is the Osterville Fire Station at sunset. I appreciate everybody's time coming here today. There's more celebrations coming in July. Hope everybody has fun. If you have any questions, I'm glad to try to address them. Other than that.
I'd like to bring up one historical perspective, how the rescue squad got started. And about 1950, they had a major accident, Route 28 and South County Road. With people laying all over the road. And the ambulance service was done by Cape Cod Hospital. They had 2 ambulances for all of Cape Cod at that time. And they're waiting for the ambulance. Supposedly it was down in Wellfleet. But when the ambulance arrived at the scene, both guys that got out had ice cream cones in their hand. And they apparently stopped at 4 C's on the way. And the firefighters who were in the street waiting said, that's the end. We got to get our own ambulance. So that's how we got our first ambulance, by way of the ice cream cone.
I got a call, but that's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Paul.